Hello, hi. I'm Amy Trahan, Assistant Curator of Public Programmes at Artist Mundi. I'm a white woman with long mid-brown hair. I'm wearing a black shirt that's buttoned to the neck, and I'm sat in a white room with some bookshelves to my left. Welcome everyone to our fourth At the Table talk with Sancintya Mohini Simpson, one of the 6 artists we're working with for Artist Mundi 11. We are joined by writer and historian Becca Voelcker, writer and curator Hajra Haider Karrar, and artist and writer and curator, Shivanjani Lal. We also warmly welcome Nikki Harris and Russell Andrews, who will interpret the talk together through British Sign Language. The At the Table conversations reflect a fundamental part of Artist Mundi's mission. Through close engagement with both individual artist practices, we seek to stimulate dialogue and debate, both internationally and locally, that fosters a deeper understanding of ourselves and others. We will be sharing at the beginning of this talk, screen sharing. When screen sharing, to view Nikki and Russell larger, please click and drag the bottom of their window to make them larger on your screen. And if using live captions to turn on, please click the captions button on the bar at the bottom of your screen and turn the captions on. Use caption settings to adjust your font size and color. We will be in discussion for 1 hour, and then there'll be a 30-minute Q&A. So please add your questions into the Q&A box and they will be shared to the speakers. This programme of talks is supported by British Council, to whom we express our sincere thanks, and also thank you for joining us. I'm now really pleased to invite Sancintya Mohini Simpson to introduce her work and then also bring everyone into discussion. Thank you. Sancintya, if you'd like to turn on your camera and unmute.
Apologies, I lost the screen.
No problem. It's easily done online, isn't it?
First tech mistake, sorry. Hi, my name is Sancintya. I'm a mixed race woman with dark brown hair, wearing a black dress in my office, which is a wooden building with messy furniture in the back, and my dear friend Chris Massey's painting of a pawpaw tree. So I thought, firstly, I would like to just acknowledge the presence of all of you here, and thank you so much for making the time to be here, as well as Amy for organising, and Becca, Shivanjani, Hajra for participating and being part of this conversation. Thank you. I just want to acknowledge the ancestors, my ancestors, who are present here today with us through my body, and yours, present with you wherever you go in your bodies, and also the land in which I live, born and work, the land of the Yagara, Jagara and Turrbal people of Mianjin, also known as Brisbane, Australia. And thinking about, I guess, what connects us in threads through my father, who is Pakeha, so white New Zealander, European New Zealander, and his family who settled on Maori land in Aotearoa, and through my mother's family brought to South Africa onto the land of the Zulu people, my history being shaped by settlement, displacement, and movement. And I also want to acknowledge my indentured diasporic community, through, which Shivanjani is a big part of, and so thank you as well. So just wanted to share a few images and talk about the works that are part of the Artus Mundi exhibition at the National Museum in Cardiff and chapter. So there's several works spanning, I guess, different times in my practice that I've been exploring this history of my maternal family, which is the history of indentured labour, in particular of South Asian Indian community, but sort of explaining why I do this and sort of where it came from, and then sharing a bit of research and a bit more of this personal side with you as well, that usually sort of I don't get to share, and appreciate the opportunity. So through this work, I've sort of wanted to, like, for me, it's been about how do I understand the world around me and my experiences, or how do I make sense of it? And art has been a way that I've always used to ask those questions and process it, and explore it. And so the work has changed with my own personal understanding of my histories, but also my own body, my own family, my own experiences. So the work shifts with that. And so first off, it's sort of, this work is much more looking directly at those histories and sharing those stories that people wouldn't necessarily know or hear, using a style of traditional Indian miniature painting. So using the sort of traditional way of storytelling that predominantly was used to tell the story of like wealthy kings and religious stories, but instead using it to tell the stories of labor women, like dark-skinned labor women, of like mixed castes, like lower caste, so not just this usual depiction, but also acknowledging that there are gaps missing. So the fact that there are these panels that are separate and broken up, and there's this white, so you can see the paper, there's parts where there's images, there's scenes of people doing different things, and different forms of labor, whether it's cutting cane or domestic labor, and then also scenes of trauma or violence as well, like, hidden in this, or love, or like the complex multiplicity of experiences that went on these plantations. So this specifically was looking at South African history and stories, like from the colony of Natal, where my family was sent, but other works look more broadly at different histories shared. And then there's also, like, when I was thinking about, I guess, these histories, I was thinking about the archive and how this archive didn't tell my family histories. Like, this archive had lots of gaps in it, and I didn't have records that would fill these gaps. All the old people who had this knowledge were gone. And it was a really frustrating feeling. So I was trying to think about how to fill those gaps or fill that loss I was feeling. And so thinking about how memories exist, or how stories and histories exist. So thinking about how place or materials hold memories, like the ocean has memories of ship movements and people passing, or like a field that was, that was sort of farmed and has changed to something else, that soil has many layers of memories and histories in that. So this work here is, there's like black clay pots, like vessels or lotus, so the sort of round pots that were fired in sugarcane mulch, which is a byproduct of the sugarcane industry. So sugarcane mulch and sawdust, which blackens the pots and creates sort of these marks. It's like a sort of open fire, like very physical. And there's fragments of the like broken shards, ground ash, and then the sugarcane mulch. So you're seeing different sort of like, there's still traces of that sugarcane in that ash or in that mulch or even in those pots or those shards. It's just different levels of it. So different, I guess, thinking about like how much memory is maintained or how close do we look for these histories or memories. And I guess like a big part of it was thinking about the body and how the body inherits and holds memories from our ancestors. So through epigenetics, we inherit through our DNA, like our ancestors' histories, memories, as well as like intergenerational trauma. And so thinking about how sound and smell, so this work, vessels, this iteration, this shows the installation at Chapter with the soil mounds and these black round pots where sound comes out. And this iteration sort of is it's sort of not about triggering like traumatic memories. It's about thinking about how repair works in the body and how we can have traumatic or intense memories, but we can have histories like this, but how do we work through and how do we process them and deal with them? And like somatics and sound, vibrations, and sort of these traditional practices being a part of it. And the video work at Chapter has a scent. So thinking about how scent triggers memory, sensation, what we hear, sounds, all these different things can be something that triggers a response in our body. Like I was thinking about, what would my ancestors have heard or smelt or experienced? But it sort of also come to the realization that I didn't need to make my body go through arduous work like making those pots and firing them with open flames and inhaling all this smoke and ash, because it's just perpetuating sort of this violence or this colonial violence that my body already has a memory of. And it's through chronic health, like my chronic health, like, and disability that I guess it sort of made me more and more aware that I have to be conscious of this and be conscious of audiences' experiences as well as my own. And that can't just acknowledge things and leave them on the surface. We have to offer some way of working through or working with these histories, not just leaving them there to sit, in a sense. So like another way I like to think about how we can, work with this idea of repair is through community and kinship. So this, in the next slide, we can see the work, Kapalkari Kulikari, which is about this ocean kinship. So there's 3 scrolls that are sitting like halfway on, like sort of halfway on the walls, sort of going down onto tables, and there's a poem with it as well. And these are more abstract. They have text, which is songs sung during indenture by these different communities. So songs from Mauritius, Fiji, South Africa, Jamaica, and depictions of women, in community and together. So, but like starting from finish to kind of being hazy and less clear, but still clear. And I think in that sense, thinking about these connections between these communities and how there is this kinship and similar, understanding. And that's a really joyous thing that we have. So that work sort of looks at that in a sense. One of the things it explores, I think and then the next painting, Tapu, was sort of earlier on, like it's a sort of larger scale work, but doesn't really have, won't show that one because it's sort of, I guess it's sort of like another, like this idea of the story of the ocean, or this experience of being taken over this ocean, what it meant, this history. But yeah, it's sort of, that's a very brief, quick, like run through of some of the works. But I wanted to share with you something else that I thought could also be a form of conversation, connection, and threads for conversations with our other speakers. So these are some threads I've compiled to share, which sorry, which I think like things in the past year that have come into my life, where I've come across that really kind of felt connected to this exhibition in Cardiff, or the conversation surrounding it. So the first slide is actually a painting of a young man called John that Becca actually shared with me in some writing correspondence last year. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that what Becca has written. I want to tell you about a man who lived and gardened very near where I grew up in the mountainous coastal north of Wales. This is him. And it's a painting of John, who's a black, like young man, like teenager. And it's sort of like, black surrounding him. And he's in like traditional European jacket with high neck collar, sort of like formal portrait. Becca writes about this much more in a sort of, beautiful way. But she tells a story about how he was born in Africa and he sort of built this life in Wales, and he was the first black gardener in Wales and England. And I think that to me, I was like, oh, my great-grandfather was indentured as a gardener as well as a child. And it sort of was just a coincidence thing. But I thought like it's something that I don't really talk about, but I wanted to share with Becca. And in a sense, I felt like I wanted to share this with John too, being someone who's not from Wales or Cardiff, coming to somewhere that I don't know a lot of history about, but being able to find something and understand a bit more about a place and its history was really a beautiful gift. So I wanted to sort of share this back. And this next slide here, this image is actually of my great-grandfather, Subramanian, who was indentured in Natal, South Africa at the age of 6 years old as a gardener on an estate. The plantation he was sent to was actually owned and run by an Australian-born, like white colonial Australian-born man called Armstrong. And it was just sort of, I think, these threads that we can have, like as someone born in Australia who's been raised here, like I acknowledge there is a deep history of sugar and slavery, with South Sea Islanders being taken and being put into the system. And it's a very like awful dark history that not many people talk about. But it's also connected to this broader history of indenture of South Asian and Chinese and other people like post-abolition, and connections to Fiji, which Shivanjani's family's history was there. But like this image I only received last year, and he's like obviously in his gardening, like a uniform. He was a gardener on the estate there, but it looks like a very formal waiter's uniform of like thick wool. And at first I didn't know who the image was of, and I was trying to figure out who this young man was. And I was able to sort of like compare features with this photocopy of another photograph that I had, the only image I had of my great-grandfather, and like see and recognize like him as a younger man and him as an older man there. And the next slide, if I go through that, is this here is a ship list. So when the British, when they took people, they love to like document and write these sort of logs. Like I was able to look at the ship log, the journey ship log that my great-grandfather took at the UK National Archives. But this one here is sort of a digital, like I've been able to access digitally recently. And every person who was indentured was given a number. And in South Africa, that number was your identity number, and your children inherited that. So his number here, you can see Subramanian 149380. And he's the second from the bottom. And you can see he's come with like a brother and I think his mother, and elsewhere I can find his father. But if I show you the next slide, this is how I know what that number is and how I'm connected to it. Is like 15 years ago, like my mum was doing this, trying to, I guess, get documentation for an overseas citizenship of India document. And so she had to prove her Indianness or prove her connection to India. And so like my mum didn't have a proper birth certificate, but my uncle did. And he was born in 1955. And you can see here, this is just an excerpt. I haven't shown all the details because obviously it's his birth certificate. But you can see my grandfather had one name given to him, as well as my grandmother. So they all had only one name legally that they were given, and it's written differently in different places maybe. So Ailu and Gonabaigam. And then it says parents' official numbers, and next to each parent's name, there's several numbers. And these numbers were passed down forms of identification. So you inherited these numbers as a form of identification. And so like these numbers were originally all I had. And I was able to find these logs in the ship list with the names or the minimal details next to these numbers, but not understanding how or who or sort of like how I was connected to them, or none of us knew or could really say that for all of them. And it was sort of like we knew who the men were predominantly, who were sort of closer to my my mother and my uncles, but not any of the women's names or the women. And you can see here, even though my uncle was born in 1955, it still says indentured or free, and it says CB, which means colonial born. So like the fact that on his birth certificate, it has that, like to me, is like an example of the fact that it's not distant history we're talking about. So you can see here, this is a listing of another family member, 1969 Doi. Oh, sorry, we're back. So she was 4 years old, and I had no idea how I was raised to her. She was 4 years old and brought on her own with a 6-year-old brother. So just her and a 6-year-old brother. And so like for 15 years, I've been trying to find out like who like who they were, how we're connected to them. Like I didn't even know the name of my grandmother's mother. And so last year, like after 15 years, I've been able to finally trace and like have all the names of all our family members from the ship list to my mother and uncles now, which is like incredible experience. And as part of that as well, my uncle found, which is in the next slide, this box, this tin box that my grandmother had kept, all these photographs and documents that none of us knew about, hidden away. So she obviously took a lot of care for them and had cared for them for years, but not on display or anything, just in these tin boxes. And so after sharing like this fact, I've been able to like find all the names of our family members, my uncle, you know, gave me this box, and it was sort of this like absolute like treasure gold, like of so much that any like the information I couldn't find was there, but it just sort of all these things that I didn't know, or like it was sort of getting to know my grandmother through this box in a sense too. And I want to share some of the things that were in here. So this was a past document of my grandfather's mother, so Sobigam. Again, women's histories, and you can see the numbers, birth register, you can see the identity numbers, like down the bottom number, like those inherited numbers. And they ripped them up like when a person died because they didn't want someone using it to move around freely who wasn't free. And on the back, you can see it's all the children who were born or died listed. And so the children who are on that past sort of were able to move freely if they had that. But yeah, it's got her thumbprint on the back. And it's sort of this sort of really, like this is something that is like these past documents were the only way you could move around freely. If you didn't have one, you couldn't. It's sort of like it was a really incredible thing, and was sort of able to find proof of my grandfather's sister who died, supposedly died of malaria, but like when she was born and when she died on the back of the pass here, which there is no other proof of. And so like those women's histories, it's always the women's histories that have been the hardest to find, and have been stories that are not told correctly, or not told, or whispered, or sort of have been lost to us. So if you click through, so that's the back of the pass here. And if we click through again, to next slide, these were some images of Sobigam here. I think the things to see images of women, and that they were important enough to be photographed, and to see that love in them, and to see the pride these women have. And there's very few images, but the fact these images exist is phenomenal, and incredible. And you can see the next slide here. I like being able to sort of, put these images of her over time, and so yeah, her husband died when my grandfather was 6, and she had 5 children she had to look after on her own, and she sold fruit in the markets to keep that, those children alive and fed. And there's another image in the next slide, which is beautiful, just to see again joy and pictures of our community that hold joy and that aren't part of a landscape, or other people representing us in different ways, that have joy and that have love. And the fact that the women are centered here again is incredible. So this is Ragama, who was my grandfather's grandmother. And you can see the next slide, there's 2 pictures of sort of her, which is incredible, like the fact that one image exists, to speak of 2. And for me, it just fills me with so much joy and love. I just can't explain that in words. And so the next slide I wanted to share is thinking about epigenetic inheritance. And I think the thing about epigenetic inheritance is that really interesting is that sort of like the idea that, you know, um, in our grandmother, when your mother was in your grandmother, you were a germ being formed like cell in those first 4 months. And the fact that sort of that DNA and that connection to a grandmother is like so intrinsically deep when we think about mitochondrial DNA and how our nervous systems are inherited from our mothers. And so when we think about trauma and women's trauma and how that's passed down, like it's so like real when you see it in this way, and how those epigenetics work. And so I just wanted to read this little poem briefly. I imagine my mother inside my grandmother's womb, the cells inside my mother's womb, inside my grandmother's womb in those first 4 months. The cells from my grandmother kept me safe through mitochondrial DNA, epigenetically intertwined. My mother's revisions include new twists and turns, Indrami, Gonabigam, Muniama, Methama, Kaniyama, Kondamal, Sobigam, Nagama, Doi, Ragama, Kamachi, Sobamal, women whose names had been forgotten, absence in sonic recognition, but remembered and continued in epigenetic memory. So sort of for me, knowing those names of those women and having those lines and names of women and being able to actually know that and have that and say those names, and it's such an incredible thing. And the fact that those women are important and we want to remember them. So just, and one sort of last thing connected to that, there's another, so if we go to the next slide, that's sort of more about that, and we'll go to the one after. So when I was flying to Cardiff in October, I was reading The Fortune Man by Nadifa Mohammed, and it tells the story, it's sort of based on this true story of this Somali man in Cardiff who was a seaman. And the descriptions of his time working on these sea ships, like I knew my grandfather worked on ships, sort of, but I didn't really know the extent. And I've sort of through that box I've been able to find, if we go to the next slide, sort of like all this evidence of his time working on these ships. And in this book, all these roles on the ship that Muhammad had, like Matan had, were jobs that my grandfather had done, like where he was a machinist and he worked with fires, and he was a junior cook. He worked up and he became a senior cook. Eventually, he left that role because they replaced all of them with Indian men from India. But you can see in the next slide, there's a beautiful image of all these men standing on the deck of the ship, which we have to think about this as a fact that this was an apartheid South Africa. And I guess, what did it mean to be on this ship in international waters? What did it mean to travel and being in that space opposed to being in South Africa, and what that allowed for, and those relationships and kinships, which would have never been possible in South Africa. And so I think about Matan's journey from Durban to Cardiff, and the fact that, like, my grandfather could have passed on the docks there. Like, it's such a gift that this book that Nadifa wrote was able to share with me a part of my grandfather's life I never knew about, because he died of a heart attack in his when he was 52. So that was a real gift. And on this other hand, sort of mentioned how I sort of work with the archive and collect postcards. This is sort of another accidental something linking to Cardiff I'd come across. So if we go to the next slide, like I collect postcards from eBay. And this one I received, I didn't know what was written on it, and I didn't know where it was sent to, but it's of like ex-indentured men and children in Johannesburg, like at a market. But the person who sent the postcard has written, "The dirtiest human beings on the face of the globe," on the front of the postcard. And you can see on the next slide, they've sent it to a Miss Gilbert, 18 Mundi Place, Cardiff. And so I looked up this address just out of curiosity, and you can sort of see some details of, I'm assuming who this person who's Miss Gilbert's father. But it's sort of like this postcard was quite different to any other postcard I'd come across, because it was sort of very rarely do the people in these postcards at that time get acknowledged as people, as individuals. They're usually just part of a landscape promoting agriculture, or like part of a pretty background. And so it's sort of like, oh, someone acknowledging the people in the postcard, but in a very like aggressive way, which normally in the research, it's more like it's colonial violence, or it's how, it's like, it's very sort of sterile. It's not someone writing a personal postcard. So I just thought like the timing of it, before I was going to Cardiff to receive this in the mail, was quite strange and interesting. And the fact that, like, I think with all these different things I've shared, is this idea that, what we think is new is not necessarily new, or how like we've always been interconnected, even across distances and time. There's always been movement and migration and journeys and these threads and connections. And I wanted to sort of leave that as like an opening, this idea of, how we have threads and connections in this world, and sort of, they can be surprising, but I think it's about looking for them, and how this sort of knowing, understanding history is so important, because history repeats and it sort of doesn't go away. It just repeats, sort of, and acknowledging, knowing this is really, I think, important. Yeah. So, who wanted to go first? Was it Shivanjani? Would you happy to speak about threads and connections?
Yes. So hi everyone, I'm Shivanjani Lal. I'm a brown woman with short chin length brown hair. I'm wearing a brown vest with a silver, turquoise, and coral necklace. I'm currently in Victoria, Melbourne, but I'm usually based in Darug country in Sydney, and I have matrilineal and patrilineal ties to Nudrogo, Navosa, Bar, and Ra provinces in Fiji. And I am connected to the Indian subcontinent through the north and south of India. And I too am a member of the indentured labour diaspora. I think we've known each other for about 10, 11, possibly 12 years. When I was a baby artist slash curator, Sancintya very kindly included their work in a show that I was ambitiously curating. And it was making me think a lot about I was like sort of frantically writing notes while you were talking, but I was thinking about the precision of your miniatures in relationship to the looseness of the performances that you make, that have this kind of conversation that is, I was thinking about the sort of like that feel like a conversation about informal histories. Like I feel like the performances are accessing informal histories, and like the conversation in the miniatures are about absences, and that also speaks to informal or unknown histories. And then the other thought that I had was, there's also a conversation about the shift from the impersonal, which is a reflection of the earlier works, into the movement into the much more personal work that is beginning to reveal itself in your work, but I think also is revealing itself in language. So there's many threads that we can speak to, or that you can speak to, but I just kind of wanted to think about that relationship of I guess like precision and like improvisation, and what your what like how do they inform each other, and also like how do they reveal each other, like reveal themselves in both types of works that you produce. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a I really never thought about it that way, but it's actually a really good way of thinking about it. I think it's sort of the poetry, it's the performances in the poetry to me are much more bodily me,
Yes.
whereas the paintings, like I'm telling a history that is shit, like it's not just mine. So it
Yeah.
has to be done with precision.
Yeah.
Like,
But there is also like a bodily cost in that as well.
yeah, and
With
that,
very
yeah,
different costs. Yeah.
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that the fact that it takes so much time, whereas the performance has some, or poetry has a bit more freedom in terms of being able to play, or the sort of being able to sort of play with what I reveal or hide, or what I want to, like the performances, I do them like now thinking about, well, what experience do I want for my body? And that experience being something reparative, or something not just voyeuristic for people to watch, but something actually that I feel like is doing something.
And I was also just thinking, as you were saying that, I was also thinking that the performances have also been a conversation with your immediate family as well at times. And I guess it has been a way for you to share personal parts of the history of indenture through performing collaboratively with your brother, and like I guess to a certain extent your mum,
And you?
but and me. Oh gosh. Um, uh, and other people as well. Um, but yeah, I think that there like that's also really interesting, because like in that last the scroll work that you were talking about, that is becoming looser. And I
Mm.
guess like or like because I remember we were having this conversation about your plans for this work at Cardiff, and you were talking about how you wanted to be, or how you wanted to sort of explore I mean, I guess the only way I wanted to like how you wanted to sort of talk about smallness, but also less preciseness, and I guess like that kind of conversation of blurring the lines. I think
So
it's like
there wasn't an image of it, but in chapter there was a little concertina book that's the large scale Wesley paper folded, and it's called For Gonna Bygum, so for my grandmother. And it's just depicting women and children, but joy. There's no violence. There's no, but I think, yeah, like it's, I guess with your practice, like you work with the personal and your personal archive. You've had those photographs to work with, but it
yeah.
is,
It is also like about absence as well, because that archive that I received of my grandmother's happened 10 years after she passed away. So again, it was like about connecting to the images as they were, but then also like there have been these sort of slow revelations. Like I feel like my there like my mum would sort of tell me a story about like an image of um a sort of um a bure, which is like a traditional Fijian house. And then she'd be like, "Oh, that was my grandmother's funeral pyre." And I was just like, what are you talking about? Like just how the people in our families kind of like reveal these histories ad hoc, is like,
And it's sort of trying to understand whether like where the truth is,
yeah,
or because it's like in fragments or layers, or sort of like because these stories have been whispered for so long, it's trying to find, but again, like being okay with that.
yeah, with those fragments, and I guess also um with the kind of like, I mean, I guess like for me, I was always okay looking at like like um I sort of was like for a really long time wanting to like give the middle finger to the archive because it didn't include us. And so I was just like, I'm just going to focus on these images which are very present. And I'm sort of almost reversing what I'm doing at the moment because I am looking very specifically at the archive. Um, because also my cousin gave me a bunch of stuff because she was doing research, and I think it's also interesting how family plays a role in these conversations. You know, like I think your uncle sharing those documents with you was such a huge turning point for you last year. And you were so like, and are still so excited about it. Like, and I think it's like the thing that I'm really excited about for you. And also, I want to take a moment to acknowledge just how proud I am of you and how much I love you, and that the way you nourish these stories is so vital. And I think it's also really important that it comes from a place of like that, you know, the kind of construction of how we're meant to look at art in a like our stories often comes from a colonial or colonized viewpoint and lens. And so when you sort of actively make the decision not to pursue those stories, you also have to sort of turn your back on those types of gazes. And so I think that the strength of these works is about those absences and those silences. But I think maybe we should invite some other people to the conversation.
Yeah, I'm not sure who wants to oh, Becca, who go? Here's Becca.
Hi, my name is Becca Voelcker. I'm a white woman speaking against a white curtained background, and I have a dark roll neck top because I'm speaking from the UK, unlike Sancintya so far, and it's cold here. Um, Thank you so much for that amazing series of slides or threads, as you called them, and also for bringing Jonna Stimson into the story, which is extending across multiple continents. As you mentioned, I'd written when I was invited by Artes Mundi to write about you. I felt immediately like I wanted to write to you or with you, and it seemed to me like the form of a postcard would somehow be appropriate. And I think there's a poetic thing going on here about just always growing up in Wales, knowing that Australia is the other side of the world. And so the idea of a correspondence across distance seemed good. And I'm so interested and grateful that you really picked up on that thread today in a form of reply. So we had this resonance that you found with Jonna Stimson and then your own great grandfather. And of course, what immediately comes up from these people's stories is the brutality and the beauty of the past, and that these things are both real, were both real. And I was so struck when you were talking also about the women's histories and these photographs of women and mothers who look proud and strong. And so their images are also evidence of solidarity, not just suffering, but the suffering is there as well. So I really get a sense of the complexity that you're holding and that's coming through in your work. And then the postcard that was sent to Cardiff is another just shocking example. of what we find in the archive. So this really was making me think about how in your work, site is storied, place is peopled. That when we're talking about land, we're also talking immediately about what is done to it, by whom, with whom. Is a very, very human story. And I wanted to ask, maybe in going back to this idea of, a correspondence, we're talking today across the world, across time zones to each other, to ask you if you could talk a bit more about your situated practice. You are in Australia now. This is itself such a weighted site, archaeologically, historically, in colonial history, of displacement, of movement, of land, and of incredibly different time zones stacked on top of each other, including in the land, the soil itself. So I'm just curious how much Australia, and you could take this in any direction that you like, but how much this plays into your work and your thinking.
Well, I've been so fortunate to have amazing First Nations artists here in Mianjin who sort of like being a mixed race person or a person sort of like in the diaspora, which is sort of away from family, the proximity to family or people, it's sort of, and communities is like not there. So how do you find a community and to be accepted and to sort of be able to learn and share with the First Nations artists here, like Judy Watson, Dee Harding, Richard Bell, Gordon Hookey, like they just, Chris Bassey, like there's so many incredible, like deep feeling, deep thinking artists. And I think so many things that how I approach my work is definitely informed by that care and not just like the ethical sort of approach about what you show and whether you have permission to or what you sort of put out there and your role as an artist and that responsibility of being an artist, what it means, but also like this how your body knows or you inherit in your body and how land holds these memories and what the land inherits. There's so many things fundamentally, which are now all talked about in like science, like I've grown with as philosophies and ways of thinking from this community, like Imagine, and I'm so fortunate for that because again, it's sort of the artists are not working with much funding or support. They're artists. Like it's not, there's not a lot of infrastructure. There's not a lot here, but they make work because they have to do it or that's what they do. And I think they do it for that reason, like because they need to. And I think that's really beautiful. And I'm so fortunate to have their example and to still be learning from them all and having their friendship and having them as an arts community. Yeah. But again, as well, the whole East Coast, which we live in, is sugar and has a deep history of sugar. They wanted to bring Indians in the indenture system to Queensland, but there was a lot of, like the White Australia policy was created in response to Indians in South Africa and that sentiment of like that fear of what happened, like Indians staying around and South Africa's a little problem and all like you can look at 100-year period with newspapers discussing Indians, the coolie problem, all this, and looking also to Fiji as an example of why, and that create like that being impetus, like partial impetus for the White Australia policy, and then like politicians from Western Australia, OEM Neville, being part of the apartheid development and like policy and construction rules. So this sort of thing with like these colonies being connected and this impact and this, like, it's not like separate in this idea of things being separate, but like I think there's so many, you know, like when the first Indians arrived in South Africa, you had a whole bunch of white Afrikaners leave to Australia to escape it, which happened at the end of apartheid. So this idea of like repetition or the same sort of rhetoric that gets put in the media is the same rhetoric that's been in the media for hundreds of years. Like, I think is something that I also sort of think is like we don't, it doesn't get talked about because sort of we're in the moment.
Perhaps we could come back to the question of time, because I think there's more maybe to talk about there and the different repetitions of history. But should we bring in Hajra so we can all join the...
Hi, I'm Hajra Haider Karrar. I'm a brown woman I'm originally from Pakistan, one part of the Indian Ocean, but based in Berlin, and currently in another part of the Indian Ocean, which is Sri Lanka. And I have shorter length light brown hair, and I'm wearing an olive colored shirt with a V neck and collar. And I had the privilege of working with Sancintya for Indigo Waves and Other Stories, renavigating the Frisian Sea and Notions of Diaspora, which has been a 5-year project. And the exhibition of it took place in 2023 in Berlin at Savvy Contemporary. And I think I just have, since the beginning, when I first got to know Sancintya's practice, and have really been taken, have had deep respect for working with familial history, for working with familial history that holds so much violence and trauma that continues. And I think this is also something resonating with what Shivanjani has shared, and also Becca. I really wanted to, sit a little bit more and focus a bit more on the process, and also especially the emotional and psychological weight that is very much part of this process, because it's, I think, this you have shared in one of your conversations before, Sancintya, that the artwork is a product of it, but not the point of it, and which is also very, very clear from what you share. But I'm also, like one of the things that really strikes me is, and I also is something very brave, is to think through a history that you come across, and like it all kind of unravels and starts making sense, something that you have felt in your body all along, but starts making sense 15 years ago when you find these documents. And I'm just really, of course, it is a trauma that's been carried by your ancestors, but it is something that's introduced to you very recently. And it's just that proximity to that. And also, you have shared how, so first is like that point of discovery, and then there is, researching the absences and not finding any information. So there's also the labor of really digging deep and figuring out where to find, this information and how to make sense of these fragments. And then comes the point of thinking and figuring out a way to share this narrative. And then on top of it, it's also that responsibility that you feel that you need to share. And connected to that responsibility is also the expectations from the family. And this is just very, largely breaking it down, because these are all very, very important aspects of the process. really tough ones. And I'm just really also thinking, there was also one point where you had mentioned about finding about one of your ancestors, yeah, I think your mother's uncle, where in one of these historians, sorry, I'm forgetting the name right now, where you mentioned that in the official records, he was just declared as missing, but it was a case of a suicide. And I'm just also thinking of how it's not just familiar anecdotes, but it's also additional information that you find, and the violence of it and the trauma of it, which is just so ever present. And, you know, like even in these moments of joy that come through that you highlight, there is, you know, like a backdrop, which is very heavy. And I was hoping that maybe if you could speak a little bit about, you know, how do you cultivate or create that kind of capacity to, you know, share, and also to find that space in all of this heaviness, like there are moments of release, because I feel like it's very important to acknowledge this space, because I feel like a lot of conversations focus so much on repair and healing, that I feel like it's really so important to also acknowledge the simultaneous and very, very heavy and presence of, you know, all that you go through in that process. And, you know, I was just in that sense also thinking of collaborations, which are so present in your practice as well. So yeah, I'd like to speak to it now.
So yeah, so many things there. Thank you. Yeah, I guess like there's a lot of like I don't talk about this directly in the work, but like having mental illness in the family, or the results are very visible of trauma inherited and what it's done to people in my family, and that impact like on my childhood, on my adolescence, on my life now, like I can't escape that. And so that's part of the lived experience. And like other friends who are, you know, who are part of this like large diaspora also talk about their communities. Like it's just our families are complex and still struggling because this history, like, you know, and like with South Africa, we had apartheid, we had so many like it's, you know, like it's sort of apartheid ended in 1994. And so like what does that mean for a community, like in terms of repair healing? That's not like, it doesn't happen immediately. Those effects generationally, what it does to be under stress all the time, cortisol, the body. So like I think the body being something that can hold on to something or hide something for a certain point, and then it breaks a threshold and sort of you have to face things or it will become what it is. And so like this research is hard, but it's also giving care. Like for me, it's spending time getting to know my family, that like maybe, you know, like getting to know my grandmother through what she thought was important to keep, and remembering that smell of her, and never being able to have that adult relationship with her, but a very different version through my mother's eyes of my grandmother. So like this idea, like, I guess, you know, we think about epigenetics and they talk about like, we can't repair the past, but you can repair your DNA or something, and that in turn future generations. So this idea of giving care through trying to make sense of it. And yeah, so I was able to find the death certificate of this family member, Pichagadu, who was listed as having drowned and then listed elsewhere as a suicide. He was in his 60s and he supposedly died of drowning, but also diabetes. And like, it's not clear, like that violence in that colonial document, like the lack of medical care and the lack of it is so clear. Like, and doing this work, I was going through each, like a lot of these things weren't indexed. So I'm reading all these death certificates of children, of people all ages for all sorts of things, where, and like what someone's written or what they've perceived as important to write. And so like there's a joy in finding this proof or this like document that reveals something, but also knowing that it's not reliable still. And neither was this, and neither was this. But also because of the mental illness, like the health in the family, like that interracial trauma, like stories that I've been told are not necessarily, you know, there's like black magic, there's this and that. Like, so knowing what, like, I have to take everything and hold it, but no, it's not necessarily true, or there might be different truths in it, or there might be multiple versions of it, but there's always some hurt that's maybe created that, or there's something from there, but also like, so even though like it is complicated, it's sort of like it is painful, but it also like it's something to hold on to rather than going, why is this person like this, or why, you know, why is this like this? Where is this coming from? Oh, this is not a cultural thing or a community thing. This is trauma. And being able to recognize that and be able to find joy for our community, not just be in these cycles, or like find things to celebrate as well, like is so important, I think, because there's so much pain in this history that is still present in all our bodies, like, and you can see in all the indentured communities, the health, the chronic health conditions that are pervasive in the Caribbean, in Fiji, in South Africa, like all these scientific articles looking at these communities, and you can see the effects of that. So like knowing why things are the way they are, and the fact that it's not the way, it's not actually our culture, it's something that was a survival thing or the way the body went, but also like we are allowed to have joy, we're allowed to have love. And like in terms of like my inner child, like seeing that love of a mother to a child is like beautiful, because it's not what we were necessarily told existed, and to see it existed at a point, even through all that hardship, is really powerful, and something I think really gives you like, you know, like it sort of fills a hole in there that that love exists, and it's always existed. We've just been in survival for so long, so much, and we can't lose sight of that.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. And I think maybe we can come to that later in the questions, but I was also, you know, it was also very much related to this question, to the narratives that you share with so much care. And also, it's also the stories that you share about joy as well, which is highlighted. It is the everyday, the desires and the lived experiences of each day, I think, which also really, you know, to find this kind of space with so much grace is also, you know, it was more of an acknowledgement to come from, you know, a space like this, and to build on these foundations in such a beautiful manner. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I'm just halting now because I think we might have questions Or
I'm keeping an eye on the chat, so if anybody does
Okay.
have questions, I will see them. And yeah, before we receive any, I'm just wondering if I can. It might be a little bit obvious, but I'm so struck by the minute scale of your painting and how much time and therefore care that must take, that you're with these pieces of paper which are also handmade. So there's another layer of care and this manual feeling of touch in your very materials. But the amount of time you must spend painting. And that seems to be a form of offering, or of, I don't know whether you would think of it as ritual, but I wonder if you'd like to speak to that.
can I
Well,
add that question
yes,
as well?
yes.
Because just, in South Asia, the tradition of miniature painting, and you mentioned it earlier briefly, and I actually also wanted you to speak more about it. With it's something that has been used by royalty. It is used in this style is used in court paintings and then later religious paintings for and it's also, like the process of making the paper, like everything is so painstaking. It's like prepping everything and, like the time, of course, absolutely, because it's like one stroke at a time and you build up the image. But it's also, like really this idea for me, I'm just adding to Becca's question here, is also this idea of, it's not just about sharing a narrative, it is also the kind of placement, like what you select and how to present it. And that is also something that really, I'm also really struck by. And yeah, would be great if you could share a bit more about it.
When I first started learning, so I went and learned from master painter Ajay Sharma in Jaipur. I hadn't done any painting before, so this was my first experience painting. And it's like I'd had panic attacks because you have to slow down your body and you have to, like, it's a mindful practice and it's a practice of slowness and stillness and being present with that. And my body wasn't used to being in space. And so for me, it's been an amazing like practice for my body to learn because it is this practice of like somatic repetitive motion for your body. You're fully in what you're doing. You have to quieten your mind. You have to be calm. You have to, and so like I've had to grapple with this and sort of be in this space. And I think Shivanjani, you were saying about how like the looseness is coming into the painting from this very precise. I think part of it is allowing this looseness as well for sort of this cortisol, like, this is the thing that I want my body, I want to be good for my body, like in terms of this care and this act and the, this time given in painting. And so like allowing some looseness is okay in there as well. Because I guess it's this thing where like there's a lot of looking and a lot of time and a lot of moving things about, like, but also like I love when I do, like my favorite part is doing these tiny little strokes at the end. Like that's when it becomes, there's life in it, it's something, and it's not just flat color, because it's just flat color up until that point. And that's my favorite part, is those little lines that become an expression or it becomes something. And for me, that like, that's about like giving that care, but also slowing down my body and giving care to myself. And I'm trying to shift that. So thinking about how I work in the scale and time and my body. Yeah.
The sense that I get behind them, particularly it really jumped out at me today when we were looking at the images of your exhibition and the wave forms behind the ship. It just really struck me how long you must have spent and how in every wave or in every stroke, I was thinking, you're thinking something while you're doing this. There's something, or you're processing something. There's a real labor or love or just the sheer I like the idea of that you've just spent so long with this surface building it up. That's why I think I was thinking of ritual somehow, that there's something to do with the time that you're
Well, I think
spending
miniature
with the
painting
memories.
is so much about ritual, like it's so much about ritual in terms of tradition and process and materials. So the concertina book I made, like that was with stone pigments, and that's much more time. But because it was like that's like for my grandmother and these stories, like I was like, this is stone pigments, like using that is worth it, even though it's more time, because it's much more labor involved. And I think like I'm not a master of this, this like you know, it's like you can spend a year just painting circles, like, and you know, I've not had that training, but I think it's it's a practice which is about respect of the practice and these rituals and this tradition and this history, this long history of it. And so like even if you're doing it in your own way, in your own style, you still have to respect that. And the way it works and the steps and the process is that, yeah, it is, it, you follow sort of ways of working and thinking. And it's definitely, like you could say it's spiritual or meditative, but it is that you have to be present with it. You can't be like elsewhere in your mind. You have to sort of be really with the work. But that's also the beautiful part of it. Like you have to slow down and you have to like to be able to like do those strokes. You can't rush it.
One of the thoughts that I had when you were talking about the practice was also that it's kind of like an echo of a practice. Does that make sense? Where it is informed by tradition, but I guess through your own diasporic lens, you're able to kind of shape-shift it into the language that your community needs. And I think that that's the really primal thing about it. It's not seeking to emulate or replicate, but rather it's using these tools of tradition to kind of formulate a new story. But I was also thinking about how sort of kind of in relationship to your question or how our sort of families and communities are beginning to be ready to receive our histories in different ways. Because I feel like certainly the thing that I've noticed in the last sort of 10 years of practicing is that there is a growing investment and interest in indenture and kind of really delineating that history so that it is specific, and it isn't sort of folded into the narrative of, I guess for want of a better word, desiness, which I don't necessarily agree with, but it is its own thing because I think like there's like a body language um and also
The way
like
we
other,
cook food, the way we speak,
yeah,
like there's even though like there's a vast distance across oceans, this understanding
yeah,
informed by this like
yeah, and like the language thing is super interesting because it is about resilience, right? That sort of the ways in which we creolize the language so that it becomes multiple communities trying to connect with each other, not just like for instance, Punjabi communities or Gujarati communities, but rather like, like my family, like I'm sure yours is like is like like on my mum's side is like Telugu and Tamil and like speaking multiple languages, and they're cutting across these lines to talk to each other. And I think that something about that feels really primal, because they're just like getting to the point of it. But also like, how do you then extrapolate what you also need from it? Yeah.
And it's different in different spaces and different, but there is this like you know, like you can have like my sister-in-law is Fijian, and you know, Hindu mother, Muslim father, and that exists in that space. And there's a beautiful photograph I have of all these women around the table, Tamil, Telugu, Hindu, with Muslim women all sharing meal in a table. And some of these places there is conflict, and it's conflict as part of this colonial system and these things about which sort of that residue. But then like, yeah, apartheid, or the Indian community was segregated together. And so like they went to schools, but they all had to speak English in the Indian schools because that was the common language, because there were so many different languages spoken. And unfortunately, a lot of like, especially our Tamil, Telugu communities have lost language because like Afrikaans and English and what was sort of this like, you know, survival. And but like now it's like you said, like there's much more talk about acknowledging these histories and acknowledging what happened, and but also online community spaces, community, you know, like journals. Like in the last 10 years, it's been incredible how much conversation about this system and about our communities and this diaspora have opened up. And I think it's really wonderful, because I think a lot of us, it's that thing of, you know, not belonging, but we belong. Actually, there is a community we belong to, and there is a shared understanding. And you know Shiraz as well, who's dear friend and like cousin, brother, you know, like is part of this, you know, like, so these friendships, like, but also like, you know, like with my family, like my cousin's married to Indo-Mauritian. This is like, it's just an understanding. And I think like there's so much about Edward Glissant says about creolization, about these communities, but like about that crossing, or this sort of idea, like Cal says about coolitude, you know, there is like, yeah, and we should hold on to that and celebrate that too, even though there is tough histories, there is special things there.
I'm just reminded of your the Jahajan Ship Sisters, the series of 15 paintings. And what I absolutely, absolutely love about it is that, you know, it is the only thing that animates the entire series is the figures of these women. And that is it. There is no other trace or border. I also really, you know, I think I find it very special that in the series there are no borders, so they are often they are connected in so many ways. But it's also how, in the face of this kinship that is found, and in these spaces of joy that have been illustrated by you, it is how everything else becomes a negative space within that. And I'm also, you know, it's also very striking, because this is like being multilingual is something that you also mentioned about your maternal family as well, Sancintya, and also as a means of how these, you know, it's stories of very strong women. And so just, you know, how you share about these kinships as well, and how it really, like that suit of 15 paintings becomes a community in itself. And it's yeah, it's just so beautiful. And I'm also really also left with what Shivanjani had written on your practice also in the last line where she says that what is left is sisterhood. And it's also just so striking because, you know, it is that space of joy, community, care and love that supersedes everything. Yeah.
I'm so grateful for that.
And I'm sorry to come back in really, because we could keep the conversation going, I feel, for hours. If we were around the table, I'm sure we'd continue the rest of the evening. But I just wanted to give my deep thanks to Sancintya, Becca, Shivanjani and Hajra, and also Russell and Nikki for having such a rich conversation. I was thinking, you said something earlier on, Sancintya, which was art can help us make sense of the world, and how it struck me that stories help us make sense of the world, and those stories can be about land time or material time or research time, and they all kind of hold and make time for these stories. And when Becca said something about the brutality and beauty of the past, that makes me think of the brutality and the beauty of the world that we live in now. And I know Sancintya said we're in the moment, so I want everyone to perhaps be left with that kind of sentiment and thought. So again, thank you so much. For everyone who's joining us, we've put an audience survey in the chat box, and it'd be great if you could give us some feedback. It's really important to our future programmes. Our next At the Table talk takes place on Thursday the 19th next week with Jumana Emila Boud. So please join us for that as well. And again, yeah, my huge thanks to all the speakers tonight for such a brilliant conversation. Oh, I say tonight, no, it's tonight with Sancintya. This morning with us.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much. Really appreciated all generosity and time that you've all given. So thank you so much. It's been really lovely.
Thank you. And I hope these conversations continue outside of this talk as well. So thank you very much. Bye, everyone. Thank you.